Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Life Treasures and Golden Moments. This is Natalie Silver, where I share with you two stories of miracles and stories of inspiration. Today, I'd like to share two stories with you, and they're both about miracles. The power of love and devotion is channeled into the hearts of young and old alike to keep the family strong and working together. Occasionally, families run into problems they can't handle by themselves. Is it too far-fetched to believe that he might take a personal hand in helping these run a little bit better? The story that I'm going to tell you about today is called A Father's Dream, and the author of that story is Charles Sellier. Arnold Spencer sat at the kitchen table, newspaper in hand, a cup of coffee slowly cooling as he ignored it. Arnold usually read the morning paper with his coffee, but had found during the last few mornings nothing of sufficient importance there to keep his mind from drifting back to the dream he had been having nearly every night. It wasn't particularly a scary dream. It was just, perplexing. "Are you off in dreamland again?" "Huh? Oh, yeah." His wife, Grace, had disturbed his preoccupation and brought him back to the business at hand. He shook the paper a couple of times and started thumbing through it, looking for the sports section. "That same dream again, huh?" she asked. "Uh-huh," he answered absentmindedly. "It's same one." "Tell me again." Gracie brought a cup of coffee to the table and sat down. "Maybe we can figure this out together." Arnold folded the paper and set it aside. He tested the coffee for temperature with a careful sip, found it just about right, and took a full drink. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "it's like I told you before. I'm out in this no man's land, someplace I've never been before, or at least if I have, I don't recognize it." "How about the fog?" Gracie interrupted. "Yes, the fog is there, thick and rolling up everywhere. Then maybe 20 or 30 feet away I see Louise. She's waving to me. Actually, it's more like she's motioning me to come to her. I start in her direction, and she turns around and disappears into the fog. And that's it." "She isn't shouting or complaining or anything?" "Nope." Arnold took another drink from his cup. "That doesn't sound like our darling daughter," Grace said with a smile. "Are you sure it wasn't somebody else?" As if on cue, Louise Spencer, Grace and Arnold's 16-year-old daughter, came bouncing into the room. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Gotta get some new shoes." She threw it at them as if it were all in one sentence, and to add the exclamation point, Louise dropped her not-quite-so 2-month-old sneakers into the wastebasket. "Hey, hold it," Arnold cried. "I paid $40 for those just a month ago. They can't be shot already." "Oh, Daddy." Her tone was patronizing, and she looked at him as if she were certain he needed a brain transplant. "They're Nikes. Nobody wears Nikes anymore." Arnold looked at Grace as if to say, "Are you going to help me with this?" But she just stood up and walked over to the sink. "I thought we were talking about shoes." There was a consenting tone once again, and now she was trying to bring Grace into the discussion on her side. "Will you please explain to Father the difference between Nikes and Reeboks?" Grace turned to face her daughter. The Spencer family lived well on what Arnold had made as the sales manager of a fairly substantial manufacturing company. There were just the three of them. Consequently, Louise had always been given everything she wanted. Both parents were beginning to regret that generosity. "I'm afraid you'll have to explain that one yourself," Grace told her. "The difference entirely escapes me." "I don't believe this." Louise threw up her hands in exasperation. "You both must have grown up in the dark ages." "Yes, well, let me throw a little light on the subject," Arnold said, retrieving the exiled sneakers from the wastebasket. "You can wear these until they wear out, or I get $40 worth, whichever comes first." Louise put her hands on her hips and glared at him. "Oh, sure," she said defiantly. like I'm going to wear shoes that have been in the trash. She turned and stomped out of the house. Grace turned quickly back to the sink and tried to hide the smile. She didn't think Arnold would appreciate the humor she found in seeing him standing open-mouthed in the middle of the kitchen holding a pair of girls' sneakers. And she was right. "I don't see anything funny about this," he said, dropping the shoes on a chair. "She'll wear these, or she can go barefoot." "She will, you know," Grace replied. "Will what?" "Go barefoot." Grace walked up and straightened his tie before looking him in the eye. "I hate to admit it," she said, "but we are raising a little snob." "No," Arnold snapped back, "we are raising a big snob." Arnold Spencer, husband and father, was experiencing a parent's common dilemma. There are only so many years to raise and guide and influence one's children. Finding the perfect balance between giving them the things that will help them grow and become healthy, happy adult human beings, and the things you want to give them just because you can, is a universal predicament of parenthood. There is always the fear that one day soon the children will be gone and you will have given them too much of one and not enough of the other. Arnold didn't know it yet, but his strange reoccurring dream was trying to tell him he would have the opportunity to balance the scales. One Saturday morning, a few weeks later, the second ingredient of the Spencer family miracle fell into place. At 12:15, Arnold picked up Louise at the mall, where she had been shopping with her friends. Arnold watched the group as they came bustling out of the main entrance, laughing and shoving one another. Louise seemed to be one of the leaders of the group, and for a moment his chest swelled with pride. Louise quickly spotted the family station wagon, waved to her friends, and rushed over and jumped in. Arnold was about to pull away when he spotted Ruthie Coswell coming out of the door. She was by herself, and when the other girls saw her, they quickly turned away. "Hey, there's Ruthie," Arnold said. "Shall we give her a ride?" "Nah, her mom's coming. Let's go." Arnold was puzzled. "Louise," he said, "if Ruthie was here, why didn't you tell me, and I'd have told her mother I'd pick you both up? I thought Ruthie was your best friend." "Just because you live next door to someone doesn't mean you have to be friends," Louise snapped. "Besides, none of the other girls like her." She slumped back against the seat and refused to look into Ruthie's direction. No question about it. Arnold's little girl had an attitude, and Arnold didn't know what to do about it. His wife kept reminding him it was all in growing up, but Arnold was beginning to think it would take a miracle to get through to her. On the way home, Arnold decided to take a shortcut through a new housing development that was just getting underway. No one would be working, he was sure, and cutting through would save him a mile or so. Besides, it gave him a chance to see if any new construction techniques were being used that he didn't know about. They had just rounded a corner in the newest part of the development when Arnold spotted a pickup truck. That in itself wasn't too surprising, but the two men standing in the back of the truck were obviously throwing something into the high grass and weeds next to the road. When they saw the station wagon, they jumped back into the truck and drove hurriedly away. That pushed things way past Arnold's curiosity threshold, and in spite of Louise's complaints, he turned the station wagon to the right and drove over to the spot where the truck had been. Arnold brought the vehicle to a stop, climbed out, and walked around, and he looked down into the grass and in the debris by the side of the road. There, lying among the splintered boards and waste of the construction, was a small dog, its sides pumping painfully with every breath. He walked over and knelt beside the animal to get a better look. Arnold couldn't tell how old it was, but it was certainly no puppy, and he couldn't identify the breed. What he could see of the multicolored coat underneath, all the dirt and mold, gave him the impression that this little fella probably didn't have what you could call a bloodline. "Oh, yuck!" Louise had gotten out of the car and came over to see what her father found so fascinating. Arnold just looked up at her and shook his head. If his mind hadn't been made up before, it certainly was now. "Open the back of the station wagon," he said, reaching down and gently lifting the small dog from the ground. "Daddy," Louise fairly shrieked, "you're not going to put that awful-looking thing in the car." "Just get the door open," he said impatiently. "We've got to get this little guy to the vet." Louise looked around as if maybe she'd rather walk home than ride in the same car with a dirty little dog. But at last she dropped the tailgate door of the station wagon, then hurried around to climb in the front seat before her father could ask her to actually touch the thing. Arnold laid the dog gently and made sure there was plenty of clearance before closing the door. It wasn't that he was such a dog lover. It was just that he hated to see anything suffer. There was no way he could leave the dog there to die. A short time later, at the veterinary hospital, Arnold was having a hard time dealing with his daughter's impatience. He had been listening to a steady stream of complaints ever since picking up the dog, and his own patience was wearing thin. "Louise," he said firmly, "we're going to wait until the doctor tells us what's wrong with that little dog, if it takes all afternoon. So just knock it off." "But the game starts at 2:30, and that dumb thing isn't even ours, and it's just "Louise," he said, in a stern voice as he could muster with his daughter, "one more word and I'll leave you here and take the dog home." A few minutes later, the veterinarian, a tall young woman with her hair tied back in a neat bun, came into the waiting room. "Well, Mr. Spencer," she said, "that little guy is in pretty bad shape. He's not a pup, and he's been sick for a while. Looks to me like he's probably been starved and abused as well. If we can save him, and it's a big if, it could be expensive." "What's the alternative?" "Well, he's apparently been abandoned," she said sadly. "We'd have to put him to sleep." "Can we go now?" Louise moaned. Arnold was finding that his daughter's attitude was making it very easy for him to make up his mind. "Tell you what," he said to the vet. "You fix him up, whatever it costs, and call me. He's got a new owner now." The veterinarian smiled and extended her hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Spencer," she said. "We'll do everything we can for him." "Good. Oh, by the way, Doc, can you tell me what kind of dog he is, or how old?" "Well, he looks to be about 7 or 8 years old, but I'm afraid he's a variety of all of his own. Mostly terrier of some kind, but the ears look almost like a Sheltie." She paused for a moment, then asked, "Why, does that make a difference?" "Not at all," he said. "I was just curious." "How old are you, Mr. Spencer?" the veterinarian asked. "I'm 47. Why?" "Well, in dog years," she said with a smile, "the two of you are just about the same age." 5 days and $140 later, the little stray dog was in his new home. A couple of shots, some tender loving care, and the right amount of good food had quickly put him on the road to recovery. Grace found herself quite excited about the idea of having a pet in the house. As a young girl growing up with 3 brothers, she had gotten used to always having a dog around. But after she and Arnold got married, the subject of pets just never came up. When Arnold opened the kitchen door and let him in, the dog headed straight for Louise. She tried desperately to get out of the way, but the animal was standing on his hind legs, pawing at her jeans and coaching as only a dog can coach to be petted. Grace smiled at her daughter's discomfort and immediately dropped to one knee and stretched out her hand. "Come here, little fella," she pleaded. "Come on, let's get acquainted." Immediately, the dog dropped to all fours and raced over to sniff and lick the outstretched hand. "I think he likes me," Grace said, gathering the dog into her arms. "I think we'll be great friends." "Yeah, well, I've got enough friends," Louise sniffed. "And besides, he doesn't even have a name." "Oh, yes," Grace said, releasing him to scamper about the room and check everything with his nose. "He must have a name." Arnold watched as the dog jumped up into a small bed he'd fashioned earlier in the day. Grace had found an old pillow and covered it with terry cloth to put inside the box, and the dog took possession of it immediately. I'm open to any suggestions, Arnold announced. Anybody got any ideas for a name? Well, considering the fact he'd be dead now if you hadn't coughed up $140 for the vet, Louise said, I think you ought to be called Lucky. Arnold laughed. Okay, he said. That works for me. How about you, Grace? I'd like it, she replied. But let's ask him. She turned and looked at the dog. How about it if you were Lucky? The dog barked once, and the name was sealed forever. As the days passed, Lucky became part of the household, at least most of the household. Louise still threw a fit every time she came home and found him curled up with one of her stuffed toys. Once when she walked into her room and found him smack dab in the middle of her bed, she let out such a shriek, even the stuffed giraffe jumped. Over the next few weeks, Lucky grew healthier and stronger. His fast recovery was most unusual for a dog his age. The vet even commented once that she thought it nothing shorter than a miracle. Lucky quickly became part of the family, and even though Louise tried hard not to show it, even she was developing an attachment for their new family member. It was in this frame of mind that the family began preparing for their annual trip to visit Grace's sister in Southern California. There had been considerable discussion as to whether or not they should take Lucky with them. Grace wasn't sure how her sister would take to having a dog around the house, and Louise was positively apoplectic at the idea of having to drive 500 miles sitting next to a dog. Arnold called the vet and made arrangements to board Lucky until their return. The evening before their departure, Louise was still finding things to gripe about when her mother told her to set her alarm for 6 a.m. It was just too much. Don't growl at me, her mother told her. Your father makes the travel plans. Louise stomped out of the kitchen looking for her father and finally found him in the backyard tossing a stick for Lucky to fetch. It was a game the dog never tired of playing, and one that Louise thought was perfectly inane. Louise burst through the back door in full whine. Why do we have to leave so early? She groaned. Because we have to get Lucky over to the vet, Arnold explained, and I want to get that out of the way early. You mean we have to get up in the middle of the night because of the dog? Well, Arnold reminded her, you didn't want him to come with us. He tossed his stick into a corner of the yard and luckily raced over to get it. This time he brought it back and dropped it in front of Louise. She looked down into Lucky's pleading eyes, turned around and stomped back into the house. The next morning found them at the veterinary clinic, bright and early. The vet was there to greet them, and as always, lavished most of her attention on the dog. We should be back late Wednesday afternoon, Arnold said, as he handed Lucky over. Sensing something was different from their other visits, the dog started to whimper. Hey, it's okay, Lucky, Arnold reached over and began to scratch his ears. We're only going to be gone for a few days. It's all right, Lucky, the vet said, adding her assurances as well. No shots or stitches this time, just a little stay in our hotel. Somehow Lucky didn't seem reassured. He continued to whimper, but this time all it got him was a pat on the head and a wave goodbye. The Spencers made good time on the road, and by 10:40 that morning, they were 150 miles south of their home in Sacramento. Then just north of Fresno, the southbound traffic began to get heavier. Louise had tucked herself away in the back seat with a book and her Walkman stereo. Normally, under those circumstances, she wouldn't have noticed if a bomb went off. It may have been the sudden deceleration that got her attention, but whatever it was enough to make her sit up and look around a bit. What's going on? She asked. Looks like we're getting into some fog, her mother replied. Just one of the rules of the road around here, her father added. We almost always get fog around Fresno. 50-60 miles south, it will be clear as glass. The Central Valley of California is notorious for this seasonal fog. Some of them shut down the interstate for hours. Driving in this area, you can quite suddenly find yourself in an eerie gray world that closes in around you reducing the entire universe to a circle of not more than 20 or 30 yards. "I hate driving in this stuff," Grace said, peering anxiously into the gray soup on every side. "Me too," Arnold replied. But we're not too far from the junction now. We'll have the worst behind us before too long." Louise sat back on the seat and took the earphones from her ears. It was something that had to be done every few hours, if only to keep the circulation going to her head. But this time, as she dropped the headset into her lap, a familiar sound came to her ears. It was the sound of a dog barking. And not just any dog, it sounded like Lucky. They were moving at a snail's pace. One moment, and then suddenly there would be a break in the fog and the traffic would immediately speed up. It was these sudden bursts of speed that created the greatest danger, but people somehow never seemed to get the picture. At this precise moment, they were traveling very slowly, and Louise rolled her window down to see if she could hear more clearly. Suddenly she blinked, rubbed her eyes, and looked again. "Mom," she shouted, "check this out." Grace looked back over her shoulder to see what Louise was talking about. Then she too rolled down her window and stared out into the fog. "Who does that look like to you?" Louise asked eagerly. There, running alongside the station wagon and barking loudly, was a small dog that looked exactly like Lucky. "Isn't that the strangest thing?" Grace turned to her husband. "Arnold, you've got to see this." "See what?" Given the circumstances, Arnold was not about to take his eyes off the road, of what little bit of the road he could see. "It's a dog," Grace said. "It looks just like Lucky." "That's nonsense." "Daddy, it is Lucky. I know it is." "It does look like him," Grace added, with some certainty. Arnold started to protest, but just then an off-ramp sign came into view, and he decided to pull off the freeway. He needed a break anyway, and he couldn't let Louise satisfy herself that it was some dog other than Lucky. Besides, he knew if he didn't stop and check it out, he'd hear about it all the way to Los Angeles and back. A moment later, the station wagon pulled to a stop at the side of the off-ramp. Arnold turned on the emergency blinkers and got out and walked around the car. The fog limited his field of vision to not more than 20 feet as he tried to pick out the dog his wife and daughter assured him was there. Actually, he heard it before he saw it. "I can't believe I'm doing this," he said, straining even harder to put an animal with the bark. But somewhere inside, he had to admit the bark did sound familiar. "Well, I saw it. And this dog looks just like Lucky," Louise insisted. "Lucky," Arnold reminded them, "is locked in the kennel back at the vet's." "I know," Louise said, "but maybe he's got out somehow." Even if he did, with 200 miles from home, Arnold was about to get back into the station wagon when he heard the bark again from somewhere in the fog. "Lucky?" Louise looked down the embankment and saw the dog emerge from the gloom, walk straight toward her, and drop a small stick on the ground. "Dad, it is him. It's Lucky." Before Arnold could stop her, she was running down the bank toward the animal. Playfully, the dog picked up the stick, turned and disappeared into the fog bank with Louise not far behind. "Louise, come back here." It was too late. She was already out of sight. Arnold Spencer hurried down the embankment toward the spot he had left and had seen Louise run into the fog. He knew she couldn't be far away, but not being able to see her made him very uncomfortable. "Louise," he called again, "don't be running around in this stuff." He disappeared into the fog after her. A few feet farther on, the fog opened up, and he saw his daughter looking eagerly into more fog ahead of her. "Louise, wait right there," he called, but she just turned, waved at him, and then motioned for him to come to where she was. Almost instantly, she turned and disappeared into the fog. Arnold Spencer started to call out to her again when it hit him. This was his reoccurring dream, precise in every detail. The fog, his daughter waving to him, then disappearing once again. With a new sense of urgency, he rushed forward to where she had been standing Louise, please wait. Daddy, I'm over here. Arnold spun around to see her standing back where he had been. She was smiling. He walked back to where she was, standing, his anxiety now gone. I wish you wouldn't run off like that, he said, slipping his arm around her shoulders. I was just following Lucky, but every time I got close, he'd turn and run away. They started back up the embankment toward the car. I don't think it was Lucky, Arnold said, but I guess we'll never know. They were just about to the top when Grace pointed back down the hill and shouted to them, Arnold, Louise, look. Both of them turned around and looked back down the embankment. There, in a momentary clearing in the fog, a small dog that looked just like Lucky was looking up at them, his tail wagging furiously. In his mouth he carried a small forked stick. For a moment they stood spellbound, just staring at the animal. Then Louise turned and trotted off into the fog. Louise and Arnold made their way up to the top of the hill, and three of them were just about to get back into the car when they heard the sound that they would remember the rest of their lives. Somewhere up on the interstate, brakes squealed, and there was the sound of a tearing metal and a huge crash. A car horn locked up, and there were more squeals and crashes as what would turn out to be one of the worst pileups in the state's history began to take its awful toll of lives and property. The Spencer family stood silent in the gray world that surrounded them, and listened as the sound of crash after crash slashed through the gloom. They were transfixed and horrified by what they knew was happening, but couldn't see because of the thick, unyielding mist. In the somber silence that followed, Arnold, Grace, and Louise Spencer thanked their lucky stars they had decided to get off the freeway and chase what? Could it really have been Lucky? It was much later than Arnold would have liked, before they got to their hotel in Los Angeles, but under the circumstances, they felt lucky to be there at all. News of the accident was on all the channels as they settled in for the evening. They turned on the TV and watched in complete fascination. The infamous killer fog of the Central Valley had lived up to its reputation once again, the announcer said. Southbound traffic had been tied up for hours out of Coachella Junction, the very off-ramp the Spencers had decided to take in order to check out the strange little dog. The news reported 21 dead, more than 30 critically injured, and at least 100 more with injuries that required hospital treatment. It was, in fact, the worst traffic catastrophe in the nation's history. If we hadn't gotten off that freeway when we did, Grace said, we would have been right in the middle of that. We could have been killed, Louise added. Arnold leaned against the back of the couch and put an arm around each of them. We were lucky, he said. Lucky, Louise echoed. You know, if it hadn't been for that dog. She turned to look at them directly. If it hadn't been for Lucky, we could have all been killed. Arnold Spencer was a logical man. It was true. He had seen a dog that looked amazingly like his, but his dog was locked up in a kennel 200 miles from the accident. Look, he said, I will be forever grateful to whatever little mutt that was that coached us off the road, but... I know you think it's impossible, Louise interrupted, but I'm telling you that dog was Lucky. You saw him yourself. She turned to her mother. You saw him too, didn't you, Mom? I know, sweetheart, Arnold told her patiently, but I called the vet. She said Lucky was still locked up in his kennel. He's been there all day. Louise Spencer leaned against her father's chest. He saved us, she said stubbornly. It was Lucky, and he saved us. I know it was. Arnold decided to let it drop. They were alive, and that was the important thing. Still, there was that business with his dream. It had come true, literally. He wondered how that might fit into all of this. There was one other thing that had puzzled him. The strength of his daughter's conviction. As he held her close and stroked her dark hair, He had to admit her reaction to all of this was both surprising and very uncharacteristic. On the trip home, thoughts of their brush with death continued to occupy the Spencer family. For some reason, it seemed to bind them closer together than they had been for a very long time. They each held their own thoughts about the event, but the mystery of the little dog that had saved them continued to stay on their minds. Once back home, they couldn't wait to get to the vet and retrieve Lucky, and Lucky was just as eager to see them. As soon as the vet opened the gate on the kennel, Lucky came bounding out to greet them. This time it was Louise who knelt down to pick up the little dog. "Come on, Lucky," she whispered in his ear. "It's time to go home." Suddenly, Lucky jumped out of her arms and darted back into the kennel. In a moment, he came back carrying a small forked stick in his mouth. Louise gathered him up again and turned to her father triumphantly. "Look," she said, "it's the same stick." Now it was the veterinarian's turn to be surprised. "We don't give them sticks to play with," she said, going over to inspect the kennel. "I'm sure that wasn't in there when I put him in." Louise just ignored them all and walked out the door with Lucky cuddled in her arms. For her, the matter was settled. "You did it, didn't you?" she said to the dog. "It was you. I know it was." Grace and Arnold didn't bother to explain her strange behavior to the vet, though the mystery was now solved for them too. Another problem that had been concerning these modern suburban parents appeared to be solved as well. Louise, for reasons neither of them quite understood, seemed to forget all about what labels were on her blouses and her shoes, or whether or not any of the other girls liked her friend Ruthie. Louise then decided, had found in the reality of a miracle, an understanding of what was really worthwhile in life. Arnold and Grace Spencer aren't quite sure what miracle they're most thankful for. You and I, of course, have rational senses that tell us that an old dog of questionable worth can't possibly be in two places at the same time. But then, those same rational senses tell us that dreams have nothing to do with the future. Maybe we should consider for a moment the idea that there might be other senses that connect all of us in a marvelous way we can hardly imagine. I hope you all enjoy the story of Lucky and a father's dream. Now I'd like to share another story with you that was a true story that happened to me this weekend, a very unusual experience. One of my other interests in life is that when I'm not busy with other projects, I'm a vocalist. And I sing with my daughter. And we are preparing for a big show that's coming up next month. A show for mothers, the Mother's Day show. And so I was rehearsing a song that many years ago was performed by the vocalist Helen Redding. And it was called You and Me Against the World, a song about a mother and daughter who have gone through life and shared very many memories. Beautiful song if you've ever listened to the words. Moving forward in the story, on my mother's 80th birthday, my husband, daughter, and I had given her a very special wall clock that was beautiful, and it played music on the hour, every hour, different tunes. And she had that for many years until she passed away in 2010. After she passed away, we brought home that clock and put it on our wall. And it played for about a year, but after that it stopped. So for about 7.5 years, almost 8 years now, that clock had not played. Well, after it stopped, we had taken it into a clock maker, and a person that fixed clocks all the time, and they kept it about a month and tried to fix it, but they could not fix it. They had it a whole month and just could not fix it. And we tried to find the manufacturer of that clock, but they'd gone out of business. So we loved that clock so much, and it reminded us so much of my mom. We brought it back home and put it on the wall, and there it's been ever since. But it has never played for so many years. So, anyhow, I was rehearsing that song, and I just stopped singing You and Me Against the World. when I heard this sound, and I thought, where is that coming from? It was a melodic sound. And I thought, did I leave a radio on, or was the TV on, or was that my cell phone ringing? I didn't know. But no, nothing was on. TV was off. Radio was off. No cell phone. I walk into the room where the clock was on the wall, and there was that clock playing. My heart will go on. My love will go on. I couldn't believe it. I just stood there emotionless, wondering how it could play, because I hadn't played for almost 8 years. My husband was gone, and when he came home, I told him that clock had started playing. And he looked at me like I had lost it, and I said, well, you just wait and let's see if it plays again. Another hour came up, and it played again, another song. And on the hour, every hour, it would play a song. That clock continued to play until it hit 5:32 p.m., and then it stopped. Coincidentally, it was my birthday weekend, and it stopped exactly on the time that I was born so many years ago at 5:32 p.m. So I thought maybe Mom had come to tell me happy birthday and that she loved me and that she's always with me. So, my dear friends, there's miracles that happen everywhere, every day. Some you can explain and some you can't. But they are out there, you look for them. And with love in the world, it can do so much. No matter what, it comes from all places, everywhere. If we share our love and our heart with others, life is so fulfilling and does so much to make this world a better place. So look for those miracles every day and share your love, because life will be wonderful. You all have a great day and a great week. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, take care and God bless. This is Natalie Silva.